and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. Today you find us on our ever-expanding journey of collaborations with other filmmakers, film writers, podcasters. We've spoken to a few so far and we've got a few lined up, but today we are joined by Aaron Gillingham. Aaron, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm just getting over a cold, but apart from that, I'm not too bad. Don't want to jinx it, but
no. You've got to remember that both Mary and I come from the west of Scotland, and colds are our default position. So, we're all right with that. Don't worry about it. As I've mentioned just there, we are also joined by the ever delightful Mary. How the hell are you doing, Mary? You all right?
Hello, I'm really good and ever delightful, apparently. So that's something I'll chalk that up in the list of compliments I've received from John, for sure.
Nice one. As I said, we are doing our collaboration podcasts, and today we are talking about the 2010 film Monsters. It's one of those rare science fiction stories that sneaks up on you. It's a road movie, maybe a romance wrapped inside an alien invasion premise, made with the kind of DIY ingenuity that turned Gareth Edwards into a blockbuster director almost overnight. What makes it so compelling isn't the creatures lurking in the mist, but the way that it uses low-budget realism to explore borders, fear, and the strange tenderness that can grow in the middle of chaos. So we're diving into how this tiny indie production became a modern cult favourite, why its world feels eerily lived in, and why it still resonates more than a decade after the film came out. So, Aaron, we shall start with yourself. When was the first time that you saw this film?
I was trying to think about this earlier in terms of when I first watched it, because it's not a cut and paste thing. But I think the first time I watched it was on DVD, not in cinema. I've not seen this film in cinema, unfortunately, but I saw it on DVD back in late 2010, early 2011 when it was first released on DVD. Mm-hmm. And I remember seeing it on the shelf and just, it's one of those weird instances where the cover and everything made me think I was getting one thing, which was like a really intense, gritty sci-fi action film. And then I watched it and was completely subverted in the best possible way. Mm-hmm. And it kind of hit me right at the right time, because obviously when I was a kid, I liked film. I enjoyed, animated ones and superhero ones, but it was a double whammy of this and Inception, both me seeing both of them around the same time, that made me go, oh, films can be a lot more than just, fun, disposable. There can be layers on show. And I think it was that double whammy of seeing this and then seeing Inception, and then also wanting to find out, seeing this imagery and going, how the hell did they make that? And that's kind of what sparked, I think it was those two films at the same time that then sparked my love for film and kind of catapulted it even further to the nerd I am today. Yeah, but I've always had an appreciation for film, but I think those two really just, them hitting at the right point. When I was in just starting secondary school, I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is my personality now.
Yep. I love that. Totally get that.
This was a first-time watch for me for this pod, and I am very grateful to our lovely guest, Aaron, for the recommendation. I had no idea this film existed. I've obviously seen other Gareth Edwards films, but this felt like a very different vibe. It obviously lower budget, sort of different sort of feel to it, almost felt kind of documentary-esque at times as well. So I think this will be a great one to chat about. But yeah, first time watch, which is I was going to say, is it a rare thing for me? That's not true. John and I have been doing this pod now for over 10 years, and every time you and Simmy have said, have you seen this? My answer is usually no, I haven't, because I'm a bad cinephile, but I was very grateful for the opportunity to watch this as a first time.
Mm-hmm. Just for the record, it's only been 7 years, but it does feel longer. So.
Oh, we've known each other forever.
I was a bit like yourself, Aaron. I didn't see this at the cinema. I had read about it before it had come out, and I was kind of intrigued because all the publicity leading up to it was all about how little it actually cost to make the film. And I think I saw it on probably a rental DVD or something around about the end of the year, because it came out quite early in the year, I believe. So yes, and thoroughly captivated by it. Just something again, like yourself, it wasn't what I was expecting from the film based on what I'd read, but I think it's something probably better. So obviously, Mary, you haven't seen, this is the first time you've seen it, so this question doesn't need to come to yourself, but Aaron, did you rewatch this for the pods beforehand? And if you did, what surprised you most about your latest rewatch of it?
Because I have seen this a couple, not many, but I've seen it like a small handful of times since first seeing it. And I think each time I find something new to appreciate about it. I think the first time I watched it, I was so captivated by that final scene. I think that's all I had on my brain for like the next few months at school afterwards. But now I think, obviously, doing videography and YouTube as hobbies and jobs, the more I watch it, the more I appreciate the low-budget guerrilla filmmaking style of it, and then actually just piecing together, like, on the day, they had no idea what they were shooting, and then in post, it's like, that's where it's really come to life. And I think, I don't know whether it's something new I find every time. It's just something that just gets cemented that I appreciate more with each viewing. And I think it will just keep doing that every time I do watch it.
Yeah. For myself, it was the kind of the leanness of the film. It was only 94 minutes long. From what I remember seeing it before, it felt a lot longer just because it was very enjoyable, and I was really kind of into it, and I was really surprised that it was only just over probably like 90 minutes on credits, which is kind of incredible. It really was. So obviously we've touched on the sort of the world building a wee bit. So how effective, Aaron, do you think that the sort of post-invasion world was? Do you feel it was kind of like very well developed? This is set maybe, is it 6 years after the spaceship fell to Earth and broke up and scattered, whatever it scattered. I wouldn't really want to spoil it too much, but yeah. So do you think it feels kind of developed and sort of fully formed?
I think it works for the most part. I think, and this is one of those weird things where, like, there's a few bits where it can feel a tiny bit fake, but you then remember, like, the way they shot it, the low budget and all those sorts of things, and you can kind of forgive it for those. But I think for the most part, the way it's a double whammy thing of the improvised elements from people that are not actors and just live in the environment. I think those mixed with the really subtle way that Gareth Edwards kind of use CGI to kind of enhance backgrounds that were already there. Like, oh, there's a building that's torn down. Let's just shove, a CG plane that's crashed into the side of it that wasn't there. It's little subtle things like that I think really do make it feel believable, even though obviously it's not. It feels, but I guess the best way to word it is grounded, if that makes sense. And whereas in some films, because of the low budget, sometimes the bringing in non-actors and the improvised element can feel loose, so to speak, and sometimes it doesn't quite work at conveying the thing they want to do. I think here it works better, and I don't know whether that's down to the direction or the people that they managed to grab off the street, but it just sort of, I don't know, it does work. And I think because it feels like a documentary, I think that's partially where it kind of gains that from a little bit.
Yeah, there's a wee bit sort of travel documentary elements in there, which is very nice. Mary, what did you think?
Yeah, I would just echo what Aaron has said there, and I think that documentary style gives it a sort of like a kind of frenetic energy to it as well, because there's obviously there's an anticipation of who's going to say what next, and if you're improvising a lot of dialogue, then the reaction is real, it's live, and it feels very sort of lived in. But I also think there's little small moments that really make it feel plausible, and I think one of them is there's a children's cartoon that's shown, and it's how to apply a gas mask, which I thought was a really lovely touch, because actually that would be the type of thing that would be broadcast several years down the line if you were adapting to a new set of beings or whatever being around. And there's all this there's a real chaos to the film, that although I think that it's very credible, there's a constant feeling of movement, because they are moving from place to place, but also you as a viewer are constantly looking around, and you're scanning the background, and like you've said, there's maybe a plane crashed into a building, other stuff strewn everywhere, and I think that just helps it feel very credible. Like, this world is established. Yeah, the crash happened 6 years ago. This is how people are living now, and I think it's just sort of presented as fact. There's no massive big backstory or over explanation, and I appreciate that, again, like we've said numerous times on this pod, just a trust in the viewer to sort of go along with what they're being shown.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was quite like what you're actually seeing a lot of the time in news reports, sort of the aftermath of battles and ongoing wars. You have like destruction all around you, but yet life is going on and people are still going to the shops and doing stuff, and it's just all the stuff in the background that you see tanks and things like that, or you see like buildings that have collapsed and all this kind of stuff. So there's a constant threat of something actually happening, but everybody's still having to live their lives and all that. And it kind of used that very well. I thought it made it, like say, realistic. It made it grounded, and it's stuff that you can actually see when you're watching Sky News or, you know, News 24 or whatever. You know, there's always something of that sort of look about it. Now, obviously they used real locations for Quarantine Mexico. You think that's helping with the grounding of it rather than having to create? Obviously they didn't have a budget to create worlds. They were kind of forced to use real locations. That's what it was all about. The film was getting made in a micro budget, really. You think that helps with the whole grounding and realization of the film as well, Aaron?
Yeah, I think it does work. Again, there are some other examples, names specific on my head at the moment, but there are other examples of this similar sort of thing being done.
Yeah.
But there isn't that thought through element where you can obviously tell they're trying to fix more of it in post, where I think the way they deliberately shot this, and because I like this film so much, I have watched the behind the scenes stuff God knows how many times. So the shot that's kind of in my head, which goes off of what you were saying about it feeling like a news broadcast, is the bit on the boat where the camera's on Scoot McNairy's character, and then it just pans to the right and there's just a boat overturned in the trees. And it's that foresight, again, probably helps because Gareth Edwards had a history in VFX before doing this, but it's that hindsight on the day of filming to go, right, the moment is about him, but I'm just going to pan to the right and there's something is going to go there, and I know in my head what's going to go there, but I'm just going to leave that for the moment and then figure it out later. Whereas I feel like less experienced filmmakers with a similar sort of premise or budget would probably, you know, just shoot the actor and then try and make the shot work later, where he's pre-thought it out. And I think there's a lot of moments like that, like the scene of them two on top of the temple and they just see the giant wall going for miles in the distance. And I think that lends itself to feeling more grounded and real, say, than if someone else had the same approach and tackled it themselves.
Yeah, I think the scene where Sam and Andrew are on the train, sort of relatively towards the start of the film, and you see this landscape and it's sort of vast and bucolic and really peaceful, but then every so often that peace is shattered by like the whir of a helicopter, and that to me just feels like, again, this really kind of authentic notion, as you said, John, like people are going about their lives and they're moving around, but you're just every so often reminded that there's something else going on. And I also really appreciated as well that the sort of nighttime scenes that were outdoors were pure inky black. Like there was no attempt to sort of like, well, not no attempt to light them beautifully, because you could still see people obviously and see characters, but it didn't feel like artificial. It did feel really like you were outside and you were with them. And I think that sense of being properly embedded in the landscape really adds to your viewing experience as well, because it's not, obviously part of it is budget constraints, but it never ever feels like an afterthought. Everything feels like really perfect in the moment that you're seeing.
Yep, totally. Now that's quite nicely that you mentioned budget there. Obviously this film is made on pretty much a tiny budget, so what moment feels the most impressive given the fact that it was done very sort of guerrilla style and for very little money? That I've watched the behind the scenes stuff a couple of times as well, and there's something like maybe 5 people, maybe 6 on the actual crew, because Gareth Edwards did all the shooting himself. Wow. And that's including the 2 actors as well.
Oh my goodness! Wow. Right. Okay. So that's
I think
tiny.
It was literally just Gareth with the camera, a sound guy, the 2 actors. I think that's
There's an editor back in the hotel. We had to try and piece together the hundreds of hours of footage that he kept bringing in. Yeah, and everybody else was... Oh, there was a liaison person as well, and there was... then it was just all the non-actors. All that. So it was like a really sort of tiny budget. Well, they had a crew meeting and basically in a van, which only had about 6 or 7 seats. So
that's fantastic.
So yeah, that was quite. So what moment feels the most impressive given all that background?
I mean, it's an obvious one, but I do think that final scene at the petrol station is like, that is what the film has been building up to, and it does pay off. I think it's even more, again, knowing the behind the scenes stuff and just how mental it actually was. I think knowing that he did all the like environmental VFX first, and then realized, oh, I've only got like 6 weeks, like not even 6 weeks to do the actual aliens. I think he regretted it because he'd kind of put himself into a hole. But I think considering the limitations and considering there's been so much build up to them, it's, I don't want to use the word term here, but like it's the Jaws effect where like they deliberately held back on the thing because they, have the constraints. But when they do finally show the thing, it feels earned, and I think here it does. I think it does work, but I think emotionally as well, story wise, it pays off. I know it's the stereotypical scene to pick, but
no, not at all.
I think that is what the film works at its best at, because it's built up to that. God, brain is not working at the moment. Oh God, I apologize.
No, don't be silly. Every episode for me. John does a lot of editing. He's very generous. Dear. I mean, I would echo that as a choice. The other scene for me, I think, is where they see that the trees are quote unquote infected with the creature eggs, and they glow and spark like electricity. And that really was one of those moments where I sat there and just went, wow, this is so incredible to look at. And I think that for a film that for the vast majority, you are sort of like kind of busy scanning the place because there's so much going on, to actually have a moment where it felt like I just paused and really took a breath and just took everything in and how beautiful it was to look at. That really stood out for me as well. And obviously, as we've said, on a budget of like 2 packets of crisps and a comic, to achieve something like that is really, really impressive.
Yeah, totally. So obviously, due to the budget constraints, there wasn't the sort of multi-angle cameras and things like that. So it was a lot of very handheld style, almost documentary style filmmaking there. How do you think that kind of shapes the tone of the film all the way through? Do you think it helps it, or is it just because you've seen it so many times you just go with it anyway?
I think it's an interesting one, because I think each time I've watched it, that element gives me a different kind of... I take away something different each time. Because with the first viewing, again, because the age I hadn't seen many like smaller indie films, and I was, not to sound stereotypical, but I was used to like, big fun explosion, loud in your face kind of things. So seeing something that was so quiet and understated, yet kind of hits you when you least expect it from a character and an emotional point of view, I think took me by surprise. And again, because the cover and even the poster and the reviews on the poster and the cover kind of make it out to be this like really intense action film. I think there's even a review on the back of the Blu-ray that says this is an action-packed spectacle, and I'm like, it's really not. Yeah. It's anything but that. But it's one of those times where I'm like, oh, this is what films can be. And that was what I came up, and I didn't realize films could be like that from like a tonal or a scale perspective. That was from the first viewing, and then each time I've viewed it since, I think the documentary style of it all just kind of, again, the behind the scenes stuff just fascinates me more. And then when you're watching the final product, I'm like, wow, they made this look the way it does given all of those things. There, unfortunately, again, because I do videography for a job, the more times I watch it, the more times I do kind of put together in my head like, oh, this bit is not quite right, and obviously they could have done better with that bit. But I think that was partially because shooting myself in the foot because of the job I do. But yeah, there are still things that I appreciate about this film, and I think it kind of, like I said at the start, the appreciation for it never dissipates. It just kind of gets more cemented the more I do watch it. And I think, if anything, even though they are like thrilling scenes, whenever the film does lean into like horror or action, yes, it is good in the sense of the film, but that actually sort of takes me out of it just a slight little bit. Whenever it's those quieter scenes where they're interacting with the environment, or the camera's just showing you something just for the sake of it, or it's just focused on the two main characters, I think that's really where it's at its strongest. When it leans more into the stuff Gareth would do better later on in other films, I think that's where, like, it's still impressive given the budget, but it does sort of take me out. I know it has to be there for the sake of the story, but I think that's the only thing that kind of dissipates a little bit with each viewing. That, and the fact that I completely forgot about the old lady that quacks at them. Completely, like, because I hadn't seen it for a while before rewatching it for this. And then that happened, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was a thing. That was a choice. So apart from that action scene, the old lady that randomly quacks in their face. Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely the style lends a real sort of intimacy to it all. Like, I think I must admit, before I watched this, I thought this was going to be big explosion-y action film. I didn't really know that it was going to be this sort of more kind of personal story, and that's what I really like about this. It feels like a very personal story, but inside this sort of like high concept sci-fi monster movie, if you want to call it that. So I feel like the camera techniques, although as I say is largely due to budget, it just places you in the heart of the story with these characters, and it lends itself like a real level of intimacy. And when they're looking at, you know, a beautiful fuchsia sunrise, you're looking at a beautiful fuchsia sunrise. And when they're acknowledging that there's, you know, blood-strewn boats and guns and all that, you're acknowledging that too. And I think that really is quite an achievement to really put you at the heart of something, and also to not give away the monster, you know, if you want to quote unquote call it that, for the vast majority of the movie as well. It is just this feeling that you're on the road with Andrew and Sam, and I think that's quite a rare achievement, especially for like a really early career move, to have that emotional intimacy with these characters, and that is due to the way that it's shot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that makes up quite a lot of the interest in the film, the fact that the way that it's shot, the sort of the decisions they've made in how to shoot these things. And also, I think it uses like sort of quite a slow pace to it as well. I mean, if you look at it, it's not really sort of a fast. Like both of you have said, you kind of thought it was going to be this action film, and you expect certain beats from it. So this is not that. This is quite a slow film at times. It is a travelogue, if you like, because you are basically looking over the shoulder of one or the other of the main characters as they are trying to get to the coast in order to get out of the quarantine zone. So do you think, and this is only a 94-minute film, so do you think that this kind of pacing works, Aaron?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, we're going to end up repeating what we've all said, but I think one thing kind of ends up working in the other's favour. Like, the documentary style lends to the pacing lends to the tone, and vice versa. And I think, again, that's something I didn't really notice on the first viewing. I just kind of let it wash over me on the first viewing. Whereas each viewing I've seen, I do appreciate the pacing and the fact that it's so restrained in itself, yet it's also wanting to explore stuff even more. And I think that's something I've not seen. That there is a sequel to this film called Monsters Dark Continent, and I've not seen it. But I think comparing this to that kind of proves where that sequel goes wrong, because it doubles down on the action and for some reason plonks the aliens from this film in like a Middle Eastern war zone. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why I've never wanted to watch it, because I feel like they've taken the thing people thought Monsters was going to be and doubled down on that, and not actually taken any of the elements that made that original film good. I might be completely wrong. I've not seen the film, so I can't comment. That's just my initial view in terms of like a lot of people thought this was an action-oriented film going into it. It's something a lot quieter and simpler, but in a good way. And that film's just kind of like, nah, we'll go for the all guns blazing approach. But no, I think that's the one thing that I take away from that in terms of the pacing is that if it was any faster, I don't think it would have worked, and I'm kind of glad it takes its time.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it packs a lot in, not in a rushed way. Like, I think there's just, because of the very nature of the task, which is to get from A to B, like there is a lot that you take in. As I've said, there's lots going on in the screen that you're constantly looking at. So I do think that it's really neatly paced, and I think that it's a shame. I mean, I haven't seen the sequel either, but I think it's a shame that, as we've all said, the very thing that makes this film actually quite beautiful and quite unusual is the very thing that they would completely cock up in a sequel and do, totally differently. But yeah, I mean, it works for me. I was totally engaged the entire length of the film. I honestly could have watched another half out of this, and that's, I very rarely say that about films.
Yeah, I loved the way it was paced. I just thought it was kind of gentle, and you had a chance to get to know the two main characters, which is quite nice. I have seen the sequel to this film. I wrote a review
Do tell all.
It's exactly as you predicted, Aaron. It's not very good at all. It's more of an action film. Like you say, they've transplanted it to the Middle East with the premise is that the spores have got everywhere now, and they're further, going further and further. And this is happening during a war in the Middle East as well. So they're kind of, soldiers are fighting on two fronts, and it's just not very good. Gareth Edwards is sort of tangentially involved in it. He was originally going to be doing the sequel, but then he got the call to get into some monkey business with like King Kong, Godzilla and all that. So he was knee deep in all that sort of stuff, and he couldn't do it. But I think he's got an exec producer credit on it, but he has very much distanced himself from it. It's set in the same universe, but it's not even the same style film, and there's no follow through with any of the characters or anything. It's just another take, which is not particularly good.
I don't think I'm missing much there.
No, or you're
not one to add to your watch list.
Yeah, I mean, with some of these films, like for instance, we did a review of Mulan. It was the first collab one. And for that, I hadn't seen it before, so I watched that, and then I went on and watched Mulan 2 just to and I wasn't going to go back and watch Monsters Dark Continent. For this one, I just
leave that to one side.
Yeah. Life is a little too short for that sort of nonsense. So let's talk about the performances here. We have Scoot McNairy in a reasonably early role for him. He wasn't particularly well known at this point. And Whitney Abel. Scoot McNairy plays Codder, and Whitley Abel plays Sam, the young lady that he is forced to try and get out of the quarantine zone because she is the daughter of his publisher, and he wants nothing to do with it, but obviously they have to travel together under a bit of duress on both sides to begin with. But what did you think about the chemistry that developed between them, given the fact that they were a couple in real life at the time?
I think that's one of the things that always interested me when I first saw this film, because I can't remember if I found that bit of information out before or after watching it, and then having seen the film, I was like, oh yeah, that tracks. But again, the more times I watch it, the more you do get that real. It feels. Oh god, I'm going to use pretentious words. It feels palpable. It feels tangible. It does feel like they're a legitimate couple, and the fact that they warm to each other over the course of the film and it's not immediate, I think, also helps with that pacing thing as well. Yeah. I think if they were hitting it off straight away, I don't think it would have worked nearly as well. You need that bit of tension to begin with for it then to work. But yeah, I do find it funny, again, having seen the behind the scenes stuff, is that Whitney Abel was not originally, at least I think I'm remembering this right, Whitney Abel was not originally like a thought. I think Gareth Edwards had seen Scoot McNairy in something, really wanted him. He said yes, and he was like, oh, by the way, my girlfriend's an actor too. And it just happened to work out in the end. And I'm glad they stuck with it for this one, because I think it works. I think, I don't know, something about a couple who are out of their depth trying to make their way across uncharted zone is a bit more interesting than, like, say in the sequel, a group of soldiers just trying to shoot some aliens.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit backwards when you put the two together a little bit.
Yeah, I think their chemistry is super natural. I think that they are really, they bounce off each other really nicely. You obviously get the impression that they come from sort of maybe different class backgrounds. You know, Sam is fluent in Spanish, he is not. You also get the impression that neither of them are sort of living the life they necessarily want to be, and I think that's particularly evident in the last scene where they're making the phone calls home from the gas station, because she is sort of like robotic and unsure, whereas he sounds more kind of desperate. And I think that, as you've said, Aaron, like the fact that they kind of start off almost at odds with each other, and he basically can't be arsed helping her. I think that makes for a better, more interesting story, because if they'd just gone sort of googly eyes, you know, at first sight, it would just be like, oh, okay, this is going to be a romance on top of the, you know, alien invasion or whatever you want to call it. So I think the fact that they actually have to work together, despite their sort of differences or background differences, I think is really beneficial here. And as we've all said, it really helps sort of just move the story on nicely, because you are kind of rooting for them both. And I think the performances obviously feel very natural, and that obviously is down to, as we've said, like improvised dialogue as well.
Yeah, totally. Do you think they feel like real people, or do you think they feel like characters?
I think they mostly feel real. I mean, that being said, as much as I love Gareth, there are bits of the script where, like, Scoot McNairy's character will just go, "What was that sound?" And I'm just there going, like, she's going to know what that was. Like, anyone in the situation's going to know what that weird alien noise was. So outside of those few moments where it's more of a scripting thing than a performance thing, I think that does let it down. But I think in terms of just their performances, I think it does feel real is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
Maybe. I would agree with that. Yeah, no, I would completely agree. As I say, I think the background differences in their life experience to date feels, you know, very realistic given the circumstances. I mean, she could essentially buy her way back across the border. He definitely cannot, and I think that kind of adds to the sort of drama and conflict that's there as well. Yeah, they do feel real. It feels very stilted to begin with, and I put that down to the fact that neither of them wanted to be in the company of the other one. Yeah, they wanted to obviously not be where they were. Well, he wanted to still be there, but obviously she was being told that she had to come back and everything. So he was sort of almost like a babysitter for her at the beginning, and she obviously totally resented that, because she's kind of got quite far on her own without having to have somebody look after her, and it's only because she was like nearby to an attack, I would say, rather than be totally involved in it, because obviously she hurt her arm, she hurt her wrist and everything, so there was nothing more than that. And when you see their first interaction, she's in a hospital room on her own. He comes in and says, "Are you okay?" And she says, "Yeah, I'm okay." And he's just, "Right, brilliant." And he leaves, and that was going to be the end of his involvement with her. It's only when he phoned his editor, and his editor said, "No, this is what you're going to do." And he's like, "I can't do it, I'm not going to do it." And then there's no, he just puts the phone down and says, "No, I'm not going to do it." And then the next thing you know, they're at the train station getting tickets, and he's thinking, okay, so he values his job at this point more than anything. So yes, I did kind of like that. Kind of touched on the sort of the arc of them not liking each other and then sort of getting on. Do you think that felt sort of, along with the pacing, it worked okay? Because we're not really giving anything away here by saying that by the end of the film they are very close, but it does take its time. You don't get like a wee romantic scene halfway through. He wants a wee romantic scene halfway through, but she completely shuts him down, which quite rightly. So do you think that kind of works in that way? You think it adds to the realness and sort of the character development and everything as well?
Yeah, I think it ultimately does. And again, this is partially down to like the way the film is edited, because even though it is slowly paced, I think they've done a good job of cutting down what they did have, because I think by the time they'd finished, the editor had to deal with like it was over 100 hours worth of footage that they just shot on the cuff when they were there. Wow. And it took them, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it was like 5 attempts for them to even get it down to like 110-minute runtime, and then they had to get that down to 90 minutes because that's what they promised the thing. But the fact that they've condensed it down and they've made decisions like that to just not just make things, even again, it's a weird contradictory thing where like even though the pace is slow, there are certain things from their story and their connection that are snappy. And I think if it lingers on just the right things, if that makes sense. If certain things had lingered any longer, I don't think they would have worked because they would have overstayed their welcome. But then there are other scenes where that silence between them or that awkwardness between them just kind of exaggerates the feeling of the moment. And I think they did a good job of condensing down the best bits and really trimming it down to the core thing of getting that point across. It doesn't have to be flashy. It doesn't have to have deep contextual meanings. It just gets the point across for the sake of the 90-minute runtime, I think.
Yeah, and I think that like you're not watching this for a love story either. So if it had been shoehorned in super early into their characters, it would just felt like a bit of a waste of an opportunity. Like these characters are, I'm saying they're just looking to survive. That obviously sounds a bit dramatic, but they're just looking to get back home. So romance is probably not at the forefront of their minds either. They've got other stuff that they're worrying about. And I think that the build is just a nice gradual pace. It's not anything that feels like it's, as I say, been rushed in. And obviously, as you've identified, that's down to some serious, like, you know, focus on the editing and making sure that we're not seeing like all the sort of fluff that maybe went around that. Because I think that this is a film that is about human relationships and it is about intimacy, but intimacy can mean a lot of different things. It's not necessarily about just romance and kissing and all the rest of it. So I'm glad that they made the decisions that they did, because I think it would have been a different film in a bad way if they had rushed that sort of part of the story.
Yep. I mean, there's they got to the coast very quickly. I liked that because then you weren't sort of hanging about and then having sort of any sort of real interactions up to that point. They were just focused on that. And then when they got to the coast, it was like, well, you have to wait a day before you can actually get on the boat. You know, the boat goes first thing in the morning. So they were forced to actually spend a wee bit of time together, have a couple of hotel rooms, that kind of thing. And at that point, they started to have this sort of connection, which was immediately broken the next morning when she obviously had a really nice time with him. And then she goes to his room and he's obviously spent the night with somebody else. And then at that point, he loses the passports because he leaves everything behind, which I thought was a bit of a rookie mistake for somebody who's spent such a long time in areas like that. But you know, you can forgive those sort of things. So yes, I thought the arc of it was quite nice, and the way that it ended as well. I thought that was nice as well, and then obviously
it's almost like the arc doesn't have to reinvent the wheel; it just has to work for the purpose of the story. And I think here, like we've just said, I think it does that.
Yeah. So we've talked a wee bit about like obviously the visual effects and how Gareth Edwards, being a visual effects artist, was able to do a lot of this, and it didn't obviously impact on the budget and stuff. So what did you think of the creature design itself? Was it inventive, or is it something you've kind of seen before, or what did you think?
I really like it. I think it's quite a unique design, because a lot of the time when other films of a similar style or tone go for, you know, aliens or creatures of a similar ilk, they can very much kind of look very similar, where they're just like this big bony creature that's kind of grey or black in design, or maybe red, and they're very skeletal and they've got that very angry alien face, like the kind of Independence Day sort of thing going on. And the fact that these just feel like creatures in the wild and they look more like octopuses and squids more than anything is a unique take. And I don't know, it's weird because it's not something unnecessary. I just kind of take it for granted every time I look at the film. Watch the film. But I don't know, it just works. And I think that, again, that final scene wouldn't have worked any other way if they weren't the design they were. They kind of need to be tentacled. Yeah, that's a word.
Yeah,
they need to be of that design for that whole scene to work. And I don't know, I just think it works. And again, kind of like what Mary said earlier, that whole scene building up with the earlier on with the weird like fungus electrical things on the trees, you're kind of getting hints as to like how they work as creatures without fully seeing him, and then in that final scene you're like, oh right, this relate, you're piecing the bits together in your head without even realizing it. It's like, oh okay, so they need electric, got you. But it's not spoon feeding anything down your throat, and I quite like the fact that they did. Again, if it would feel inorganic to the rest of the film if they went that approach and then suddenly put, like, you know, a news piece on the TV that then goes, oh, the aliens operate like this and this is how they work. That would just, like some sci-fi films can do. I like the fact that everything here is just a bit ambiguous, and that's like the best example for that. But no, I love the design. I think it's quite creative. It's familiar yet unfamiliar at the same time, which makes it just a little bit creepy, but also quite endearing. Not endearing, captivating at the same time.
Yeah, totally. And the fact that this story set 6 years into a situation, you wouldn't get news reports all the time explaining everything as if it was still like the 30th day of, you know, actually coming into contact with aliens. It's become old news. It's probably like the third and fourth news item, and to a certain extent they've done that with the Jurassic World films as well. It's become all very passé that there are dinosaurs wandering about, and also in the final one they were actually dying and stuff because they can't get used to sort of modern life. But yeah, totally. Mary, what did you think?
Yeah, I had written down sort of that kind of cephalopod look makes it feel very natural. And I know that sounds strange because they're meant to be aliens, but it's something that visually we are familiar with. They're just maybe in the wrong place. We're used to obviously seeing them in bodies of water. And then I also wrote at various points that it looked like sort of gnarled tree branches, the way the tentacles stretched. So I really like the idea that these creatures were very based in nature. So it was like concepts that we were familiar with, whether that was, as I said, like a tree or a sea creature or a squid or whatever. It just that they were out of place, and I think that's what makes them quite sort of like uncanny and quite memorable as well. As it's not, yes, they have been destructive, but they actually feel like very organic to the planet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you've just articulated better what I had in my head. I had a similar thing in my head, and I'm like, I don't know how to word this. You've just done that, and I'm like, yeah, you'll go with that.
Okay, let's go with that.
Nice. Yeah, I think maybe Arrival took a few pointers from this
that I
especially.
Thought about Arrival when I was watching this for sure.
Yeah, there are a wee sort of few similarities in there with them, definitely. I like the fact that it was these sort of floaty type creatures as well. And it doesn't explain why they're floaty like that, why they're not just in water, or what, you know, they can be anywhere. You get a wee hint of the fact that how they communicate and how they're obviously a social type of being as well. So they actually not, you know, they come together and they obviously communicate with each other and all that as well. So they're not just your typical monster that's just, you know, chewing up things and spitting it out. And there's like blazes everywhere you go. You see there's a petrol station on fire behind them or whatever. You know, it's not kind of that kind of monster at all. So obviously, this was 2010 and it's now 2026. Do you think the visual effects hold up from then on?
Yeah, I think for the most part they do. There's the odd shot here and there. Like, I think one of the examples is very early on. You get this panning shot from like inside a van, and you see just a tank moving down the street. But in reality, it's another van, and he's just. What Gareth Edwards has done is CG'd a tank over the top of it. And there are certain, I think it was on like my second or third watch of it a few years ago, that I noticed some of the edges were just a little, again, this is me being an editor, so I'm going to be picky. I could notice the like jankiness of some of the edges where it wasn't quite perfect. But for a film like this, again, like I said earlier, you can kind of forgive the rough around the edges stuff. But it's more those elements that I think, if I was to say they haven't held up, those would be the things I would probably nitpick. Everything else, I think, because they do a lot with very little, I think that's what makes it hold up as much as it does. Again, they take the Jaws approach. They deliberately hold back on showing you much. Like the first time you do properly see them is in the shadows. And again, that kind of works because it builds the threat of them up. But then later on, when you see them in their entirety, they're just like regular animals. They just want to be left alone. I I think that's where it works really well. And again, I think that final scene, that will never not look dated, in my opinion. Again, because half of it's set at night and it uses lighting really well, not just for the characters, but for the way that the creatures are lit as well. I think that scene in particular is where it puts its money where its mouth is, so to speak.
Yeah, I would just be parroting exactly what Aaron has said. I think the best thing this film does is to spare us too much of the creature or the creatures, but in a way that is meaningful and is suspenseful. And then when you do get that payoff, it is that sort of, as I say, that wow moment where you go, "This is absolutely beautiful to look at." So, no, kudos for doing it, for managing to achieve what they have done. And obviously, as we've said, a very limited budget. And I think that, because of his background as well, the choices that he's made in terms of what he's shown and what he's not shown are, testament to his sort of craft and his love of, VFX and his ability to spot things that are going to work and not going to work. And, I've seen films that are more recent and the effects look, very janky and very unbelievable. So I think that I'm always in awe of a film that's a little bit older. I know this isn't massively older, but I'm always in awe of a film that's a little bit older where you just think, yeah, this really does hold up. We've seen it from films like from the 1930s, as well as films that are more recent. So I appreciate the craft.
Yeah, I really liked the background visuals that they introduced in this film. Now, we are very used to that happening in every film that you see now, but back then it was used, but not to the same extent, because there was a background feature in the film where Gareth Edwards talks about the use of signage in the films and how it was real signs, but he was creating a visual effect with the signs so they would say what he wanted. And he says, I can't understand why movie productions, and this is obviously movie productions at the time, would have signs made for these. Why do they not just CG them? And now obviously they do, because the CG entire backgrounds is more straightforward to do it. But that was one of the things that he did. He had a lot of signage and just used certain elements to further the story and just add wee bits to it. And because it was on existing properties and things, then it looked more natural and it looked more realistic in that way. And it did have, as well as having the creatures with a sort of less is more, he used the effects a sort of less is more as well. He would, like I say, you would occasionally see something like a boat in a tree, but you wouldn't see it all the time. It wouldn't be something really big and visual to sort of capture your attention all the time, because he was more interested in the story that was unfolding between the two people. And like you mentioned, where they were up on top of the sort of the Mayan pyramid thing, and they were looking at the wall, and that was almost nothing as well. So for a lot of the film, the two actors really had to use imagination at times, because they would be saying, "Scoot, there's a tank." And all the helicopters and things like that. That was all. So they had to say, "Oh, right, you're going to be walking out here. There's going to be helicopters going overhead. There's going to be a terrible noise, and everything, And obviously they're walking in something that's pretty much not there, so they're having to take their cues from the director actually shouting at them, saying helicopter, bus, tank, whatever. What would you say the theme or the themes of the film is? That it's more of a sci-fi romance, a political allegory, or a road movie with aliens?
I think it's
there's no wrong answers, don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost it is just a road trip drama more than anything, and then all of those other elements you mentioned just kind of naturally ebb and flow throughout the course of the film. And I think half of that is down to the subtle world building, like we just mentioned, about like the signage and all the shots that just like pan to a thing that isn't there.
Yeah.
I think that world building gives it that added layer of the political element. It gives it that sci-fi element, which is obviously one of the main draws of the film as a whole. But it's there in the background. It's a weird thing, because even though it is the main premise of the film, it's there in the background until it becomes right at the front. And I love the fact that is the thing. But I think first and foremost, I've kind of always mentally viewed this as like a mockumentary style, not in the typical sense, but a mockumentary style like drama road trip. A little bit like Oh god, this is something that would probably end up on a DVD now, but like Little Miss Sunshine with aliens, but less funny. It's kind of the thing on the vibe that you kind of get from it, but just a bit more toned down and dramatic.
Yeah, I think because I've watched this for the first time in 2026, I feel like there are very pointed references to like the risks and costs of people smuggling. There's the scene where they sit about, talking about seeing America from the outside and the middle class comfort of like suburbia, and then that's quickly contrasted with that rather grim discovery of the abandoned town where the woman quacks. So I think that watching it now, you're kind of looking at it going, oh, this is like maybe about like borders and obviously like how people move and migrate and, getting to safety and the cost of all of this. That was kind of at the forefront of my mind because I felt like there were quite a few pointed conversations about that during the film. But I would completely agree that, yeah, this is essentially sort of like a little from column A, a little from column B, and sort of everything that you've mentioned, John, it sort of ticks the boxes for all of them. And in that sense, again, I feel like that's something of an accomplishment because it's not a typical monster movie. It's not a typical road trip movie. It's not a typical romance. It's kind of all of these things, which I think is quite unusual because I think that Hollywood generally is quite scared of genre mashups. It doesn't like to do that sort of thing. It's filmed to be sort of in neat little boxes and you can either be this or that, but you can't be both. So I think it's quite interesting that it does sort of accommodate all of these things that you've talked about.
So what do you think about one of the elements of it is really it's commenting on the fact that humans are actually the real problem here. In one way, they're a problem because in order to tackle the issue, they just try to bomb the creatures out of existence.
Gosh, that sounds familiar.
Try to bomb them to get them. And then obviously there's the whole political thing. I mean, at the time, it would have seemed very strange to have a giant wall between Mexico and America, but obviously that's not the case anymore. So how do you think it? Do you think it does that by accident? It's just part of the story, or is it just like what was going on at the time and still going on at the time, obviously?
Again, I think it's one of those things that just kind of comes naturally out of the film, whether it was intentional or not. Obviously, certain bits are, but I think there are, again, world-building elements just with background usage that do emphasize that and exaggerate it. And I think that is because there's a reason why Gareth Edwards is one of my favorite filmmakers working today, and I think it is because he takes these things that are larger than life and grand in scale, and I think if any other director was given this same premise, they'd go for like the bombastic creatures are the ones destroying everything route, whereas no matter what scale or budget or film he's working with, he always takes the human element, makes that the priority, and then sees what humans would do within that setting. I think that's why a lot of people weren't a fan of Godzilla in 2014 because there wasn't much Godzilla in it. But I actually prefer it for the opposite reason that they don't like it, because it's first and foremost a grounded character drama about these people. Godzilla just happens to be ruining everything around it, and I feel like that all of what he's done there can be traced back to monsters, and here it's kind of more overt than, again, it's something he doubles down on in stuff like Godzilla and even The Creator, where like robots are trying to live in harmony, but then obviously things happen and war breaks out. And then with Godzilla, these creatures are just kind of similar to monsters. These creatures are just sort of existing. But what's our solution? We're just gonna, like you said, bomb the hell out of them. I think here it's more, it teases certain things he does later on better. But I think it is evident here, especially with the way it's kind of bookended with the opening scene and the closing scene. I think it does get that across. Plus some of the news bits you see on the TVs, I think, do emphasize that as well. But again, that's down to the subtle world building that pushes that agenda across rather than forcing it down your throat.
I think the political allegory is coincidental in this case. I'm not saying that we weren't bombing the shit out of people back in 2010. I'm sure we were. But I think it just happens to be a coincidence. But what I think is not a coincidence in that a lot of really good monster movies, like I'm glad you brought up Godzilla because I really like that version of the film. But in really good monster movies, and we've seen this when we've looked at our own Universal monsters like with Frankenstein, it is humans that are the problem. Always humans that are the problem. They're something they shouldn't be doing. They're sort of poking the beast, that or opening Pandora's box, whatever euphemism you want to use. But I think that in this case, it probably is just a sort of like coincidence that the political allegory is there. But I think that, as I say, in any sort of good classic monster movie, it's never the monster that's the issue.
Nice. The sound in this film is very, very important, because with the film it takes a sort of less is more approach to especially the monsters. There is obviously a good deal of sound design in here, and there's also a score by a composer called John Hopkins. So how do you think the score and the sound design work together, and are there any sort of standout moments for you? It's just sort of sound related.
Spoiler alert, I could do an entire episode of a podcast just on the score, because it is one of my favourite scores of all time, which I don't think it gets to. Whenever anyone talks about the film, kind of like we have, the one thing everyone talks about is the budget and the way it looks. But I think one of the most underrated elements is John Hopkins' score, and it was because of this film I then discovered more of John Hopkins' music, and then he has resulted in him being one of my favourite artists working today, because I just ended up loving more and more of his stuff. So I thank Gareth Edwards for getting me onto John Hopkins, not as a personal recommendation, but I just love the fact that one thing led to the other. But I think the sound design is one thing I definitely picked up on more on this rewatch, and I think that complemented with the score really, really works. That one scene where, again, they're finding these things growing on the trees, but also the scene where they're just looking up that staircase into the forest. And they don't see anything, but they just hear it. Is that great example of doing more with less. And I think it really works at not just enhancing the world building, but that growing threat that at the time seems like a threat. Obviously, by the end of the film, it's not. But it's that growing sense of dread and that brooding threat that is there, but it keeps like kind of coming and going throughout the course of the film. The score, on the other hand, is, I'm biased because I love it so much. I remember when I first put the DVD in, and that main theme on the guitar plays in over the menu, and I just had that stuck in my head for days. And I think I revisited the score on its own separately, and there are so many moments that, like, I think because I've listened to the score so goddamn much, that as soon as I hear them, I'm immediately transported back to a specific scene, like the scene with them on the Mayan temple. That bit, again, it is very sweeping, but it's not like overdone or over dramatic. It's very understated, kind of like the film. It's very much mimicking the understated tone of the film as well. It's almost like we could go big, we could go loud, but I think because it stays mostly reserved and it knows that's what the film's going for, so it's going to do the same thing there. I think that's why it works so much. You don't realize the score is doing what it needs to do until you notice it, and you're like, oh, that's actually quite a lovely moment, or that just really set that moment off really well. Again, I could gush about the score for ages, so someone please talk. Otherwise it would just,
no, this is like, I love hearing people get excited about things, and I completely agree. I think that the mix is like sort of strings and percussion. It really adds to the mood of the film, but never in a way that feels like intrusive or hyperbolic, because as you've rightly pointed out, that would just be completely at odds with the style of the film itself. In terms of the actual soundscape, I do love the scene in the boat at night, and you get that chattering kind of sound. It almost sounds like maybe like moaning or like faint sort of roaring in the distance, and that I love little bits like that where it's like not like ASMR, but do you know what I mean? It just gets inside your ears, and you're like, oh, I really like that sound. I love what they've done there. And I think there's a simplicity to it as well, that it's not a typical big monster movie, so it doesn't need that bombast. It doesn't need like a big over-the-top scream or something like that to completely take you out of it. There is lots of subtleties to it that are woven throughout the film. And as you said, Aaron, you almost don't know how much of the heavy lifting it's doing emotionally, because it's just sort of, it's very, very simple. But I'm actually going to seek out more of his work, because it's very well done in this case. And John, obviously your favourite thing is to be able to listen to a score without watching the film and knowing exactly what moment in the film that something refers to. And I think that definitely is one of these scores.
I will say you might be taken aback by some of his other stuff, because even though there are elements of electronic music in the score very subtly, if you listen to there's an album he did in 2013 called Immunity. It's just it's an electronic dance album. So like going from that to this, it can be like, okay, wow, okay, that's what you're capable of.
I mean, I'm kind of sold on the electronic dance album, I won't lie.
I
would listen to that for sure.
It can be quite jarring initially, but when you get into it, you're like, oh, okay, he can deliver the emotions, but also can smack you around the head with like a really thick bass line. That's part of the reason why I love his stuff, but there's more to it than that.
It must be a weird artist to have on shuffle, because you maybe have like this really nice, like soothing moment, and the next thing you're like, dance.
I use film soundtracks, specifically like scores, whenever I'm writing anything, because I find it good. You don't have to worry about lyrics or vocals. You can just focus on the theme. And sometimes when I have a John Hopkins playlist on, I just kind of get easily distracted when one of the heavier ones comes on, because I'll be vibing for like 20 minutes and then I'll be like, oh, okay, well, I'm awake now.
Haven't done any work, but totally awake.
Yeah, now I'm lost in the dance floor now. Yeah.
That sounds like you, John, every weekend, lost in the dance floor.
Just lost, mainly. You don't need to go dance floors now. So, where do you think Monsters sits within the sort of the time frame, the 2010 sort of landscape for science fiction films? It's sort of talking about sort of low budget, high concept movies, thinking mainly about something like District 9, or maybe even something like Another Earth, which was a very low budget film, but yeah, it was a Britt Marling film from around about 2011, 2012. How does it sort of sit within that sort of? It's not really a genre. It's a wee bit, I suppose, like a genre, sort of low budget, high concept. You think it's the sort of top of it, or what?
I mean, I think this is partially because I'm biased towards it and loving it so much. I would personally put it up. I wouldn't put it near the right at the top, but I'd put it like confidently above middle in terms of not necessarily its impact, but I think mostly how it would then influence other films, because I think this was so unlike other films of the genre at the time. Other filmmakers then started to not necessarily copy it, but just kind of take very heavy notes from it instead. I think on the other hand, though, I've always felt like this film is kind of the underdog, because it came out obviously against Inception, which was like the sci-fi film of 2010. Yep. And then as the years have progressed, sci-fi films have kind of gotten bigger, they've gotten more expensive. Obviously, it's been more about the sequel sort of things and franchises. And whenever an original one comes along, like say like a big budget one like Annihilation or Interstellar or Arrival, like we said earlier, even though those are great films in their own right, it then just feels like, oh, that's another great one that's just kind of knocked this one down in terms of people's people remembering it. I think especially as well in a separate context, when people talk about Gareth Edwards' filmography, they're so fixated on the Rogue Ones and your Jurassic World and even what's the other one? Why have I forgotten his filmography? Oh, Godzilla. We mentioned it earlier. Good grief. Yeah, because they're so fixated on his franchise stuff. This one always kind of gets a back seat, and I have a horrible feeling the creator, even though I do really like that film as well, is kind of getting the same treatment. Not necessarily because it's an original film, but just kind of people watched it, people liked it, and then kind of are very quickly forgetting about it, even though it does a lot of the same things that worked really well in Monsters, but just on a bigger budget and slightly cleaner. But that's kind of where I've always viewed it. I always kind of view this film as the underdog a little bit. And I've always respected it for what it was doing with what it had. And I don't think I think some people watch this and expect something grander and then get disappointed from it. And then I kind of have to shake them by the shoulders going, that's not the point of it. But yeah, that's kind of how I've always viewed Monsters, even when it first came out. Like, yes, it got good reviews, but I've kind of always viewed it as that underrated gem that really should get the the praise and the recognition it deserves, especially considering how independent sci-fi filmmaking kind of progressed over that decade, and it became more manageable for people to do a lot with very little equipment and budget.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned District 9, because I did think about that when I was watching this film, because I just remember the sort of noise, if you want to call it that, around District 9 at the time. It was, really hailed as such a, triumph. It was this tiny independent film, and I would see that at the cinema. I feel like everyone would see that at the cinema, whereas I didn't hear the same sort of praise, I guess, if you want to call it that, about this film. And that's quite interesting, because I think arguably the Gareth Edwards career has been more interesting post this film than Blomkamp has post District 9. But what I think is interesting as well is that, and it's probably because I've been to see 2 low-budget horrors back-to-back the past couple of weekends as well, is that people often associate horror in particular with low-budget, like, creative filmmaking, and I don't feel they ever necessarily associate sci-fi with that. So I think this is a true achievement in that sense, because it's not a genre, it is a genre that typically requires a lot of money. For example, there are posters and trailers everywhere for Spielberg's Disclosure Day, which you can just imagine cost a fortune. So I think it's a shame that it perhaps is lost in amongst other films that came out at the same time. But I would absolutely put this up there as, a fantastic achievement, not just in terms of, the special effects, but actually just being a very, very good, watchable, interesting, engaging, original concept. And as we've all said, we could do with loads more of those, and loads more sort of independent filmmakers bringing new ideas to the fore, because obviously there's a place for IP and sequels and all the rest of it, but the box office has shown over the past weekend that people are really interested in new and original material. So that it's a shame that this perhaps hasn't got as much attention as it should have.
Funnily enough, as you were mentioning all that, the main comparison that came into my head was, like, this film is very similar to Duncan Jones's Moon. Like, it's a low budget sci-fi film with an original concept that critics loved, and it got a bit of talk at the time, but then as the years have gone on, not many people talk about Moon, and I feel like that's very, especially because there's like a year between them as well, which makes me feel a little bit old. But yeah, it just suddenly dawned on me as you were saying all that. I'm like, oh, actually, Moon's a good one to compare it to because of scale, because of budget, because of restrictions. But then also, it was praised at the time, and now no one mentions it unless you're talking about that director specifically. That's the only time it really comes up, and I think that's a bit of a disservice to both films.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved Moon as well. That was a great film.
Another one with a great score as well.
Yes.
Yes. Very, very good indeed. I can only echo what you guys have been saying. I think the film is fairly underrated. And like you said, Aaron, people focus more on the franchise work that he does, whereas there's a lot more to Gareth Edwards and just Rogue One and the controversies around that, and obviously Godzilla, because a lot of people didn't like Godzilla because
I really like that version.
Same. Yeah, I thought it was great, and I remember being very, very excited for it when I saw the first trailer, and it was the skydivers with the red smoke and everything. I thought, it's really good. It's not a good look when you go in the cinema and people just start looking at you a wee bit oddly. But there we go. So
they're used to you by now. It's okay.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So just to kind of finish off, if you're to show someone a scene to convince them that the film is worth watching, what scene would you show them? Would you show them the final scene of the film, or would you show them something else?
Oh God. That's a tricky one, because I kind of half the joy of the film is the payoff of that final scene. So I wouldn't want to ruin that for someone watching it for the first time. I guess I'd watch it again. I'd probably show them a scene that best gives that example of them using little with like you mentioned earlier, Mary, the scene on the boat. I think also the bit where the plane's just sitting on the water and then that gets dragged in by these tentacles, but you don't know what the thing is. You don't see anything other than the tentacles. I think that scene or the bit right before it where they're in that shack with that family. I know it's such a really small, not very important scene, but either of those would probably be the best one because you've got a good example of showing less with more. But then that other scene kind of works at showing the grounded documentary in the moment style that kind of adds to that world building. I guess those would be the two. We can save the final scene for later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would do the boat scene for sure because I think that's incredible. Do you know what it reminded me of? And this is going to sound really reductive and I don't mean it to be, but the Jaws ride at Universal, because you're aware that there's stuff that's going to happen, but you're not sure where it's coming from and all that sort of thing. So that tension build up, I think, is fantastic. But I would show them that, or I would show them the trees with the electricity, because I just think that's just one of those little marvels where it's explaining to you on some level how these creatures work, but it's not spelling it out for you. And I just think to actually sit back and look at how beautiful that is to look at. Like, it's very rare, I feel, in cinema these days that I sit there and go, wow, that is something to look at. I had that feeling obviously with like Project Hail Mary. That's obviously a much bigger budget, etc. So I think that scene in particular, if you want to look at how beautiful cinema can be, that's one to show people.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah, for me it would probably be the scene, I think you mentioned it earlier, and where they are you hear the monsters rather than see them when they're looking into the darkness up the steps, and you just get this idea of what's out there, and it's something that is unworldly, but you don't see anything, and that's sort of a perfect introduction for somebody. Just say, watch this scene, and then they'll go, but what made that noise? And say, now you need to watch the rest of the film to find out. So I would kind of take it that way.
Just a tease.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yep. So as a final wee question, if you had to survive an infected zone for 24 hours, what would your strategy be?
Oh god, I'm not the worst person to ask that question for, because I'd just be useless. Knowing my luck, I'd probably walk out the door, cough on my own spit, and then die. I don't know. If we're going with like the infected zone from this film, I'd probably just lay low, and again, probably seeing this film probably gives me a bit more insight in that context. But I'm like, right, they're not going to hurt me. I'm not going to hurt them. I'm just going to let them do their thing and kind of do my own thing, whether that be laying low, staying quiet somewhere, or just kind of taking the journey that these two make, but make it less intrusive with guns and explosions and stuff, and like military men coming in out of nowhere. I'd probably just lay low and let the creatures do their thing.
Nice. Mary?
Yeah, I mean, I have always said to my husband, if we are facing a zombie apocalypse, go to just leave me, because I would hold you back. I'd forget my glasses. I can't run. I can't read a map. I don't want to eat cold food out of a tin. But in this case, I think my strategy would be just to hold on to my passport and hope for the best.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I've got. I don't have any words of wisdom.
No.
But like Aaron has said, like, they're not intrusive beings. So like, if you don't rile them up, they're not going to come and eat you or whatever. So just hang on to my passport, keep my head down, and just try and get on the ferry.
Come to think of it, I might copy Scoot McNairy and take my camera with me, because I'd more be intrigued of just like, that's going to make a good picture. And I'll just take pictures of all the surroundings.
No, I think I would be reasonably well organised. I would get everything together that I needed and make sure that I had my passport and everything, all my travel documents. I would walk out the door and I would get flattened by a tank because I wasn't looking where I was going. I don't think I would make it past an hour.
I feel like I'd do something similar, because I've got like the worst spatial awareness and I've got dyspraxia as well. So I'd be like, oh, look at the pretty creature. Boom.
Yeah, I mean, I don't drive, so everyone knows my peripheral vision, etc., is terrible. So I'd be right there with you. I'd be trying to cross a road, and like someone would just swoop and pick me up and carry me away. So yeah.
Nice. So that is as we have come to the end of our podcast for today. Aaron, where can our listeners find more of your work?
Oh, good question. You can find me on YouTube and TikTok, Aaron at the Movies. But I also do I also write for Film Hounds, Get Your Comic On, The People's Movies, various websites. So that's mostly where you find me. Unfortunately, my Instagram and X handle is not the same as my YouTube, so I need to fix that. But you can find me on there at Arun Azza. Yeah, that. Why have I forgotten my own username? God. Yeah, that's where you can find me. I've got a mixture of writing and video stuff. Yeah.
Nice. I know Paul Devine from People's Movies. He goes to the same press screenings I go to. I take it he hasn't asked you to get involved in his podcast at all, even.
I did one episode last year about Fright Fest, but because life has been mental this year, I've kind of I need to sort my priorities out before I go on another episode of any podcast.
Nice. Yep. So with ourselves, you can find us at all the usual places. We are on all the social media channels. Just have a search for Moviescramble. If you like what you hear today and you think, I could talk shite with the best of them and want to get involved with us, send us an email at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. And if you have a film that you'd like to talk about, please, we would love to hear from you. It only remains for me, on behalf of everybody, to say cheerio.